Hello everyone, welcome to Dark Threads documentary. You need to hear this if you're a true crime enthusiast. Between 1977 and 1978, Columbus, Georgia, was gripped by fear. Elderly women were being brutally murdered, their lives snuffed out by a predator who earned the chilling nickname, the Stocking Strangler. At the center of the case was Carlton Michael Gary, a man whose violent history and eventual execution remain shrouded in questions and controversy. This is his story, and the story of those whose lives he forever changed. Carlton Michael Gary's life began far from ideal. Born in 1950 in Columbus, Georgia, he was raised by a single mother after his father abandoned the family. Moving frequently, Gary's childhood was marked by instability, poverty, and fractured relationships. Despite this, teachers noted his intelligence, though it was overshadowed by his behavioral issues and difficulty fitting in. By his teenage years, he had dropped out of school and drifted into a life of petty crime. It started small, break-ins, thefts, minor burglaries. But as the years went on, Carlton Gary's crimes escalated in both severity and violence. In the 1970s, Gary moved to New York, where his crimes took a darker turn. In 1970, he was implicated in the murder of 64-year-old Marion Fisher, found strangled and assaulted in her apartment. DNA evidence would later confirm his involvement in her murder, but at the time, Gary was convicted only of burglary and assault. Prison sentences followed, but Gary proved elusive. In one instance, he escaped custody and fled back to Columbus, Georgia. What followed next would leave a community shattered. The first murder attributed to the Stocking Strangler occurred on September 15, 1977. Mary Willis, a 59-year-old nurse, was found in her home, strangled with her own stocking. Her death was the beginning of a spree that would claim the lives of 7 elderly women in less than a year. Each of the victims was over the age of 55, lived alone, and was killed in her own home. The killer left a horrifying signature, using the victims' stockings to strangle them, often after assaulting them. Residents of Columbus were gripped by fear, locking their doors and windows for the first time. The city's trust in its own safety was destroyed. These were not just statistics, they were real people. Florence Scheibel, 70, loved gardening and baking for her grandchildren. Gertrude Miller, 89, was a retired teacher described as a mother figure to her neighbors. Each had a story and a life cut tragically short. Their murders sent shockwaves through the tight-knit community, leaving families devastated and demanding justice. Columbus was thrown into panic. Women altered their routines, stayed indoors after dark, and organized neighborhood watches. Police urged elderly residents not to open their doors at night, while citizens armed themselves in self-defense. The Stocking Strangler dominated headlines as law enforcement faced mounting pressure to bring the killer to justice. Despite their efforts, the lack of forensic technology at the time left detectives scrambling for leads. In May 1978, Carlton Gary was arrested after a breakthrough in the case. Shoe prints left at one of the crime scenes matched sneakers Gary had worn, and witness statements placed him near several of the victims' homes. To many, it seemed clear, the Stocking Strangler had been caught. But the evidence tying Gary to the crimes wasn't perfect. Eyewitness accounts were inconsistent, and DNA testing, which would later play a role in the case, was still decades away. In 1986, Gary's trial began. Prosecutors relied on bite mark evidence, shoe print matches, and his history of violence to convict him of 3 of the murders. He was sentenced to death. However, cracks in the case would emerge. Years later, DNA testing excluded Gary from at least one crime scene, raising doubts about the fairness of his conviction. Yet appeals for a retrial were repeatedly denied. Forensic experts now believe that if the DNA evidence had been available at the time, Gary's trial may have had a very different outcome. On March 15, 2018, Carlton Gary was executed by lethal injection in Jackson, Georgia. Even in his final moments, he maintained his innocence. For many, Gary's execution brought closure. For others, it only deepened the questions surrounding the Stocking Strangler's crimes. Was justice served, or did the real killer remain free? Carlton Gary's troubled life was defined by violence, escape, and mystery. His legacy forces us to ask difficult questions, not just about guilt or innocence, but about justice itself. Was Carlton Gary a calculating predator or a victim of the justice system? And will the full truth about the stalking strangler ever come to light? Thank you for watching. Let us know your thoughts in the comments and subscribe for more untold stories from the dark corners of history. See you in the next video.